This week on the podcast, guys, I'm talking about a book that explores the life of a young Pakistani man living in New York as he starts to assimilate into the American way of life. But unfortunately, after 9/11, he starts to regress back into his own culture. It's a wonderful tale told through a really interesting narration type, and if it sounds interesting, it is Mohsin Hamid's The Reluctant Fundamentalist, so hang around and listen to a novel review. Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Changez, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature. And the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle. So let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of a novel review. My name is Changez. I am the host. If this is your first time joining me, thank you so much for clicking on the episode, whether it's on a podcast or on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you're a returning customer, thank you so much for coming back. It's fantastic. This week I'm talking about Mohsin Hamid's The Reluctant Fundamentalist. And it's a pretty good book, actually. I really enjoyed it. So I've got quite a few comments to make about that. But before we get into that, we always take a moment to reflect on any mantelpiece moments, something to highlight from the week past. And this one actually doesn't come from this particular week. I think it was 2 weeks ago I spoke about how I'd been to Ghent and Bruges in Belgium, and I'd bought some lovely books there. And I spoke a lot about the bookshops and how not surprising it was, but how surprised I was to find these bookshops were beautifully curated and had really nice English sections, and there was plenty of record store bookshops, and there was bookshop bars and all these things. So it was like a really nice literary scene going on there. And then I forgot to talk about probably the most exciting thing to come out. I got so wrapped up in talking about books, I forgot to speak about the fact that in 2019 I was in Brussels and I had an Hercule Poirot Stout, which is this bottle here. This is not the same bottle. Don't worry, I haven't hoarded the bottle for years. But I had it out of this beautiful mug, and when I was in Bruges, I managed to find my own version of the mug, and I was so stoked. Beautiful ceramic mug. Pretty much as soon as I saw it in 2019, I wanted it. I did manage to acquire a glass version of it from a restaurant not long ago, probably about a year and a half ago. So we'll leave that there. But I managed to finally get the ceramic version, which I think I much prefer because I think it just looks more sort of like authentic, like one of those sort of, just a mug of ale kind of thing. And then, of course, it has a beer. You will notice this one, well, you might not notice, but this one has already been drunk. Hercule Poirot Stout. It's a great beer. This isn't an endorsement for it. It was more about the mug than the beer itself, but the beer as well. It's got a cool little sticker on it. It's got this little image. And I absolutely loved it. I was stoked to get that because it's fun. And I forgot to mention that a couple of weeks ago. So I just wanted to mention that again briefly because I was absolutely stoked to get my own version of it. So Hercule Poirot mug, Hercule Poirot Stout. Absolutely love it. Housekeeping, as always, if you would like to like and subscribe, that would be absolutely fantastic. 5-star reviews are also fantastic. They help other people find the show. If you're on YouTube, click the duck in the bottom right corner, I should say. A wonderful thing happens when you do for me. So please do that. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and on with the show. Okay, on with the episode. On to the book that we are talking about, The Reluctant Fundamentalist. And what a great book. I picked it up because I thought the cover was just absolutely fantastic. So that's why I initially picked the book up. And then the blurb sounded really good as well. So I think I'll give a brief overview and then we'll just get into what the book's about. The book is about a character called Changez, and he is talking to another character in a cafe, and through this conversation he starts to talk about his life. Now his life has been, he's a Pakistani man who's grown up. He has gone to Princeton University and now he's got a job in New York. So he's sort of very much embedded into the American way of life. And he's relatively happy about this. He's quite happy living this life, exploring this culture, I guess, and coming up in it. He's been to Princeton, so he's obviously quite intelligent. He's got a good job as a result of that. And he's doing quite well. He takes an American lover, an American girl, and things are going quite well until, of course, there is a major global disaster, I guess I could say, with 9/11 happening. And then from there, things start to change. Of course, things completely changed in the world almost overnight, but then things start to change in his own life, and it's about his response to that. And then that's basically what the story is about. I won't say any more because I don't want to spoil it, although it's not really a book that has, I guess, spoilers per se, because it is just about his life. So it's really fun. And I think where I want to start talking about it is the narration style of this book. So it is autodiegetic, which means he's the narrator. Changez is the narrator, and he's also the main character. I believe the other one is homodiegetic, which is where you are the narrator but not the main character. So think of, The Great Gatsby, Nick Carraway. Yeah, Nick is he's the narrator of the story, but he's not the main character. The main character is the Great Gatsby, is Jay Gatsby himself. He's the main character, so it's sort of that differentiation, whereas autodiegetic is Changez is the narrator and the main character of the story. Now, this story actually employs a really interesting writing style. It employs, and I've got it written here, dramatic monologue. Now, when I sort of first started reading it, I was like, this is different. And I've got a little quote to highlight what I mean. I was like, this is really different. And then you look up and think dramatic monologue, and I instantly went to, like one of Hamlet's sort of dramatic monologues. In Hamlet, just sort of him constantly speaking. And I know what it means. So I'm going to read, this is the second paragraph, just to sort of give you an example of what I mean, because dramatic monologue is basically one character speaking. But of course, that, immediately contradicts what I've said earlier, where it's about a man speaking to another man at a cafe that he meets, telling his life story. So Changez says, "How did I know you were American? No, not by the color of your skin. We have a range of complexions in this country, and yours occurs often among the people of our northwest frontier." So let's get back to that first line. How did I know you were American? The interesting thing about that is we don't actually get this other character's initial question of, how did you know I was American? How did you know I was American? The only way we ever get his questions and his thoughts and his ideas and tracings of these these stories is by the mirroring of the question back to us, how did I know you were American? So that's the really interesting narration style that's employed throughout this book. It is incredibly fun, and I've never actually experienced it before in literature, so it was really fun to sort of experience it for the first time. The book is 209 pages, and I think that's probably a good length for a narration style like this that is quite different, because you don't want to have, I don't know if I would have wanted to read a book that was 800 pages like this. So I think 200 is really good. It's also an incredibly brief read, it's very readable. 200 pages is pretty easy to smash, but the text isn't incredibly dense or anything like that. It's quite a storytelling story. So it is a really nice, lovely read. So you can smash through it quite quickly. So yeah, I think 200 pages is enough. It's kind of like if you were reading a book in second person rather than first or third. It's interesting to jump into once in a while, but we're kind of glad that not all stories are a second person or sort of this dramatic monologue. Definitely fun and definitely an artistic challenge. And I imagine the writer Mohsin Hamid had a lot of fun with it, but I imagine it would become quite difficult to write a story like this, to explore the themes you want to tell the story you want to, but then of course to keep it interesting and engaging enough that keeps us as the reader engaged and wanting to read more. So 200 pages I think is just a perfect length for this kind of story. Let's get into the story itself. So the character's name is Changez. What I loved about it was there's kind of two things going on here. There's just the general story, and it's about Changez's sort of life and how he reacts to I guess a changing political landscape in America and the world as well, being a man from Pakistan. And it's kind of a really nice story, and I think you can read it on its own sort of face value. But then of course the book itself is a vast allegory for these particular issues of immigrants coming into America and what that means and what that looks like. So I really love allegorical books because you can just read them for what they are, just a story, and you can also delve deeper. If we were going to delve a bit deeper, Changez, Changez, I interpret it as Changez. The girl he starts to date is Erica, which, funnily enough, is very similar to America. Let's start off without touching on the allegory, the story itself. Changez, as I've said, he's kind of bought into this American dream. He's been to Princeton, he's got this job, he's earning pretty good money, and he's really good at his job. And of course, he gets an American girlfriend. there are a few issues, and this American girl, Erica, has actually had a previous boyfriend who has tragically passed away, and she's kind of haunted by that and really feels not reluctant to give herself to Changez, but really incapable of giving herself to Changez completely, romantically, which I think is a really interesting struggle to go through and a really tough struggle to go through because, one, she's had to go through the death of a partner, but two, now she's got these sort of conflicting feelings of, I kind of like this guy and, I might even love him, but I'm just so attached to the boy that died. His name is Chris. I'm just so attached to him, and it's so hard because, there's the duality of like, you want the pain to stop, but if the pain stops, it probably means you've forgotten a little bit, and that's sort of a very haunting thing and a very tough thing for early 20s person to go through. So it's a really interesting story on that level, the romantic arc of the story. But then, of course, as this Pakistani boy, he's very happy to assimilate into American culture. But then, of course, 9/11 happens and the face of the world changes. Now, this book has been criticized, and there was quite a few comments saying it's quite anti-American. It's anti-West, anti-American. And I can definitely see what they're talking about because there are interesting ideas in here. And I don't mean interesting it's, it says he's the reluctant fundamentalist. He's not necessarily a fundamentalist, he's a reluctant fundamentalist. But there's some interesting ideas, like when 9/11 happens, Changez he's not excited in that he's excited people have died, but he's kind of excited and thrilled and a bit jittery because he recognizes that America has been brought to its knees, and it's this, incredible superpower that, it's one of the greatest empires the world's ever seen. And within the space of a few hours, it was completely brought to its knees. And I can see why many people would read that and that particular passage and be like, oh, this guy is, a bit anti-American because it was an international tragedy. But then I was thinking, well, it is actually kind of interesting, to reflect upon it now. An entire, this great empire was completely brought to its knees in the space of a few hours. And that is kind of something that is interesting to meditate on and consider and think about, because that is, I'm not going to say quite an achievement, because the achievement is just a crime against humanity. But it's kind of like that wonderful line in Harry Potter when Ollivander is, giving Harry his wand. And he says this wand had a brother, and it was given to Voldemort. Can't say his name. He did what did he say? He did great things, terrible but great. And it's like the recognition of it was great. It was absolutely terrible, but it's absolutely great. And it's kind of like what happened on 9/11 was absolutely terrible, but they brought an entire superpower to its knees within a few hours. So it was, it's a great feat if it wasn't an absolute abhorrent crime. So I found that kind of interesting to reflect on, to consider and to read, especially as someone that isn't American, because, I don't exactly remember 9/11. I don't have too much emotion and attachment to that particular day. All I can really remember from that day is waking up, me and my brother, before school, before my parents had even gotten up, trying to watch cartoons in the morning, which is what, you did every morning. And on every channel. I say every channel, I think back then there was 4 channels. Every channel was just these 2 towers falling, and I remember my dad coming out, bleary-eyed, very rubbing his eyes, let's over-dramatize it now, rubbing his eyes, yawning, and then we were like, Dad, no cartoons, can you believe it? That's the crime of the day for us, no cartoons. And really then I was like, the 2 towers are falling. He's like, what? Oh my God. So I don't have a great emotional attachment to 9/11 itself, other than recognizing that it is completely an abhorrent crime. But, it was interesting to reflect upon that. And then it's interesting to follow Changez on this journey following 9/11, because he starts to notice things in himself. He's a brown man from Pakistan. Suddenly now security checks have gone up. If he wants to catch a flight, it's a lot more of a process. He goes back to Pakistan at one stage and everyone's got a beard. And he starts to not shave his beard because he feels kind of more attachment to these people. And suddenly when he goes back to America, he's got a bit of a beard and people are looking at him. People are making racist comments to him in the street. People at work encourage him to shave the beard. And it's kind of like this really curious moment where, the thing that caused the crime is now what's driving someone completely innocent to then sort of slide back and regress back to a culture and reject another culture that they were quite happy to participate in. And because of this, it becomes this really kind of curious, almost coming of age story, because Changez, as he grows up, he starts to understand the state of the world and how different superpowers interact with each other. And he's kind of confused because at that particular stage, and I don't know much about this, but at that particular stage, the tensions between Pakistan and India were really kind of quite tight. And Changez kind of assumes that America's going to step in and back Pakistan, but America does nothing. And it's kind of like a tale of rose-tinted glasses, really, because he grows up and starts to understand through this sort of 9/11 issue that happens, this great crime that happens, that the world is not quite what it seems, and this country that he's come to love in America is not quite what it seems. So I've got this quote here that kind of sums up his feelings and what he regresses into as a result of it. And it goes, "It seemed to me then, and to be honest, sir, seemed to me still, that America was engaged only in posturing. As a society, you were unwilling to reflect upon the shared pain that united you with those who attacked you. You retreated into myths of your own difference, assumptions of your own superiority, and you acted out those beliefs on the stage of the world, so that the entire planet was rocked by the repercussions of your tantrums, not least my family, now facing war thousands of miles away. Such an America had to be stopped in the interest not only for the rest of humanity, but also in your own." As you can see there, it's quite nice to actually read. It flows quite nicely. But you can see there why some people call it anti-American. And it's in that passage that sort of captures why he becomes this idea of this reluctant fundamentalist. A fundamentalist is, of course, someone with strict adherence to scriptures. And this is why he becomes sort of the reluctant fundamentalist, because he feels he's almost been forced into it as a Pakistani man living in New York. And, through no fault of his own, he's then reduced to being, a brown person, with a potential beard, and therefore he can be likened to the people that committed this crime for 9/11. And so he feels like he's pushed into a corner, and because he's pushed into a corner, he starts to react in a way that is then reactive, and it all becomes a very big melting pot of disaster, shame, I guess. It's a big shame what happened, I guess, and how everyone was then forced back, and we couldn't recognize the hate that was felt could have actually possibly united us. So that's how he becomes sort of the reluctant fundamentalist, I guess. Then going to the sort of allegorical aspects of the story, and this is, I guess there's going to be a couple more spoilers in this section. Like one particular scene that I think is probably, I'd say, the most overtly obvious that constitutes allegory in this is Changez is about to have sex with Erica, but she can't fully commit to it. She can't really enjoy it in a way. And so Changez says, well, picture me as Chris. Picture me as this past lover you had. Picture me as Chris, and let's have sex. And she's able to sort of commit to the act of love in that particular instance. And it's kind of this idea that, you can't accept Changez on face value. And this isn't necessarily a comment on Erica as a person, but the idea is that you can't accept Changez on face value as a Pakistani man for who he is. He has to actually assimilate and become someone more like Chris for you to enjoy his presence. And it's those kind of moments that I think add a nice level of depth to the book, I think. A lot of the comments said, it was too shallow, it was too brief, it was too, it didn't go into enough depth of these, great big issues. And to that, I kind of say, well, I mean, it's a 200-page book. What kind of depth were you expecting? It does kind of skim the surface a lot. But I mean, again, like it's a 200-page book. It was never going to solve these issues in 200 pages, 200 very readable pages. So I think it was sort of a nice introduction to these ideas. If that's something you're interested in, I thought it explored the story quite nicely. It comes to this ending that is incredibly ambivalent and you don't know what's really going on. So I'll leave that completely untouched to leave that beautiful little ending to you. What would I rate this out of 5? I don't know. It's interesting. I definitely read more of Mohsin Hamid. I'm going to give it a 3.8, and I think that's probably pretty fair. So The Reluctant Fundamentalist. Okay, what was I reading this week? This week I have pulled the Kindle out. I don't know why I pulled it out. I just got a lot of books on the bookshelf. Probably should start reading some more Kindle books. And I decided to start reading some Daphne de Maurier, Rebecca. I'll hold that up. It's not a very inspiring cover. It's barely even a cover. It just kind of says the name and Daphne de Maurier, Rebecca and Daphne de Maurier. I can tell you exactly where I'm up to. I am 13% into the journey. And so far it's really good. I'm really enjoying it. I had to read some Daphne du Maurier in uni, so I'm glad to be back in the world of du Maurier. It's a really great story. It's going to be quite psychological, which I'm looking forward to, but a bit of a slow burn, which I love in literature. Really looking forward to it. It seems to be about this girl and this young woman, I should say, and she marries this kind of wealthy, powerful man, and it turns out his wife has died and the house is kind of haunted by the memory of her, and so it becomes like this very slow burn of psychological torture to this main character who can't escape this idea of Rebecca that haunts the house. And I'm really looking forward to it. 13% in, going to smash them on a day. Thank you, Kindle, for letting me know exactly where I'm up to. I really appreciate it. Loving the story so far, and we'll keep you updated. As always, if you have listened this far, if you would like to like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. You can click the duck in the corner if you're on YouTube, and if you'd like to head to the website and support the pod, and otherwise, please feel free to do so. But as always, just thank you for your attention. Today, to take us away, a little passage, a letter to the editor, which is kind of a nice role reversal from the Analog C Review and Offline Journal. Check them out. This is number 1. Really cool journal, all offline. And this is sort of a nice little paragraph sent to the editor. Dear Analog C editors, I welcome your initiative. Poetry depends upon imagination and craft, and the digital world does little to enhance either. Inspiration is best savoured. The process of quickening cannot be rushed. Larkin said you cannot will a poem into existence, but I fear that digital process encourage just that, with inevitable consequences for quality of thought and execution. Yours faithfully, Dr. Patrick L.